has ever purchased a mail order bride? How did that go for you? Story 1. Not exactly mail order, but I married a Russian woman who was already in the country 11 years ago. We married purely for financial immigration reasons, but we decided within a few weeks to give the marriage a fair. We're still married and are happy together. As the husband of a Russian wife, I've met numerous others, husbands of my wife's friends, who have done the straight mail order thing. I don't think I've seen a successful mail order marriage with a husband under the age of 50. Story 2. I'm actually the child of one of these relationships. My father is originally from New Zealand, and my mother, 3 brothers and I are from Thailand. We came over to live with him when I was around 4 years old, 15 years ago, and my brothers were 6, 9, and 11. I don't remember my real father very well, but he passed away about a year after I was born. Anyway, my mother and new father are around the same age, and as far as I can remember, they've really loved each other. It wasn't like that at first, I don't think, but they soon made a connection, and we are still a happy family to this day. Story 3. A father of a friend had a mail order bride. He had divorced my friend's mother a few years before due to his drinking and accompanying bad mood when drinking. He was pretty much a banana. Anyway, he brings over a Filipino lady pretty much half his age. He was about 50-yo. Thing went well for a while. They had a child together, and she got on well with his kids. Then he started drinking heavier, and the problem started. And he was abusing her in mostly mental ways, but also some physical ways. His son picked up on this and confronted him about it, and he kicked her and their child out. He also didn't want to see my friend, his son, anymore. He offers her a place to stay until she can find a place for herself and child to live. I didn't see him for a few months as I went overseas. When I come back, I find that he has fallen in love with his stepmother, and she is pregnant with his child. They ended up getting married after her divorce from his father, and from what I hear are still together 15 years later. Story 4. Not me, but an acquaintance. Russian, actually Ukraine. Twice. Disasters both time. Apparently there's a money-back guarantee, seriously. If you don't like, send her back. So the first one, he's at the airport to be sent back. She's freaking out because, as I understand it, there are unpleasant things awaiting her back home. So, she bolts, runs away, vanishes, gone. Shows up many months later, and the moron takes her back. Runs off again, finally divorces her, and then he gets another one. This one I met several times. One time I was staying at his house, and we were in his workshop, metalworking, and decide to do some drinking. He knows she has a drinking problem, but she doesn't like vodka. So he gets the bottle, opens it. Looks weird. Apparently it was mostly water, with something that I suspect was spit. Checks all the bottles, a considerable collection of spirits, all of them replaced with colored water. Oh yeah, she refused to learn English, disappeared for random lengths of time, like days, etc. He's separated or divorced now, not really sure which. Saw him at Thanksgiving, asked if he's going to do another one. He didn't appreciate that. Story 5. I personally have not, but a coworker of mine did. He was in his mid-40s, not horrible looking, but worked incredibly long hours. He is a toolmaker, Class A machinist. He went through a horrible divorce, has 2 kids. His now ex-wife, from what he tells me, is an awful person. I've never met her. Just go on what he tells me. One day, he wasn't in work. I asked our boss where he is. He said he used all his vacation time and took a few weeks unpaid to travel. Good for him, I thought to myself. When he came back, I asked him how his trip went, and he pulls out this big peach photo book, said he went to Vietnam and got married, then shows me his picture book of the whole trip. The woman he married was drop-dead gorgeous, literally a 910. He said he went through a website, got linked up to her, conversed through email, then phone. He took the trip there, liked her, and married her, and took her home. He then shows me a pic of all her sisters and cousins that are available. She basically does everything for him, and he treats her like gold and talked about her all the time. She speaks broken English, better than most that I've encountered, but is currently going to school to learn English as well. I was floored at first, but he truly loves her. I've since left that job, but from people I've kept in contact with from there say they are still together and now have a child. Story 6. My dad's current wife is a mail-order Nepalese woman. She's his 6th wife overall, with the other 5 being, more legitimate. He found her online and they had him fly out to Hong Kong once or twice to meet her in person before things went down. They've been together for several years now. I've lost track. I want to say 6, 8, and they seem to be doing fine. My dad is in his upper 70s, and from what I've heard from my sister who lived with him until recently, he can't have close relationship. Not a conversation I'd have with him, so I just assume it's true. So their relationship is 100% for companionship for him and for U.S. citizenship, a better life for her and her kid. She helps him out with chores around the house, including taking care of the horses. I don't get along with her personally, but that has more to do with conflicting personalities than her being a mail-order bride. While my sister has, in the past at least, had angry thoughts regarding her stealing our inheritance, I don't begrudge the relationship because the chances of my dad finding that kind of companionship at this point in time is slim to nil. He needs companionship just like anyone else. He's also calmed down a bit and drinks much less or so I've heard. It seems like she's had a positive influence. Story 7. I knew a rich guy that purchased a mail-order bride. Worked out pretty well for him. She was happy being a stereotypical housewife and he was happy to pay her bills, keep a roof over her head, and keep her happy. She used to tell me about life in Russia. She basically left behind a life of doing nothing but sitting around drinking cheap vodka with friends and listening to the radio all day. No jobs were to be had in her area, and didn't want to waste her life that way. Story 8. A lovelorn programmer on some Radiolab podcast. What do machines want? Possibly. Tells a story about how he was fooled by a dating scam program set up to be a sweet Russian girl who he fell quite deeply for. They exchanged emails for over a year. He finally figured it out when she would repeatedly give the same response to things like, "Can I call you? When can I come to Moscow to visit?" And finally, "I'm wearing my Fitz 28 Wibble 1 Gark pants today, 4 Zudklurg. Do you like those?" Of course he was heartbroken, and everyone learned a valuable lesson about mail-order bride dating scams. Wait, just kidding. He actually fell for the same exact scam again like a year later. But then the lesson was learned. Story 9. My dad met my stepmother through a mail-order dating service. He was interested in starting a mail-order business, pre-internet, and ordered a catalog of different startup samples. The dating service was featured, and the one page from that catalog had my stepmom's picture on it. He liked what he saw and ordered the magazine to get her address. 300 men wrote to her, she responded to him. They had a by-mail relationship for a few years, and he bought her family a phone so he could talk to her. She was from the Philippines. He flew there and proposed as he stepped off the plane. 20 years later, he says there is no one on the planet he would rather spend time with. So not a true mail-order bride, but close. Story 10. 4 years ago, my uncle married a Russian girl that he dated briefly and acted madly in love with him. They were like stupid teenagers together, really. Honestly, this girl was way out of his league. He was late 20s and has a government IT job. She looked like a model and was here on a student visa, so she could allegedly learn English at one of those for-profit ESL schools. After they got married, she immediately dropped out of school. I doubt she ever went in the first place, her English was fine already, and began stripping full-time. My uncle knew she had stripped occasionally, but she couldn't legally work in the country before. She was probably earning more money than him, but she had my uncle pay to bring her relatives over to America while she paid for them to have a nice apartment, leases on 2 BMWs, etc. Then one day my uncle came home and she was there with 3 Russian-speaking guys, loading all his TVs, guitars, and everything else he owned into a van, and she was gone for good. He won't even talk about her now. Had to hear about all the details from my dad. Story 11. When I was in my early 20s, I had a friend who was a really spacey hippie. He was a good guy, but way too stoned and laid back to find a girlfriend. Everyone was taken by surprise when he showed up with a really attractive Ukrainian girl. He said he got her from the internet. He didn't have much money, certainly not enough for a transatlantic plane ticket. So I'm not sure how that worked. She was extremely cool and I got the feeling she really liked the situation. My friend was not demanding or controlling. She got to have the life of an American kid in their 20s. Working, going to concerts, drinking beer, etc. It was a good situation compared to having to deal with some old, unpleasant person in the suburbs. Story 12. A buddy of mine heard about it approximately 10 years ago. Found his bride, a stunning blonde from Poland. She moved her, and they were legally married mainly so she could get her U.S. citizenship after 2 years of marriage. Not sure that's how it works. That's just how he explained it to me. They found out they had a lot in common, and after the 2 years were up, instead of getting a divorce, which they had planned to do, they had fallen in love. They now have a 3-year-old son and couldn't be happier. Doubt it works out like this for everyone. Story 13. My uncle purchased a Thai woman at a bar a few years back. He had been divorced once with 1 kid. She's about 30 or so now. The Thai lady had 3 sons, 2 of which stayed in Thailand whilst 1 came with her. He's about 16. She is an absolute treasure to our family now. She is amazing and works her arse off. Edit at her job. Remember, he bought her. She wasn't living the high life and has always had to work hard. Unfortunately, he's a banana and spends all her money. All the money he knows about. She has secret money. But this crafty chick has some plans of her own and soon won't need him. Not that she even needs him. She can leave whenever she wants. He did hit her once, but he knows that if he tries it again, she will terminate him. Seriously. Edit, again, poor Thai upbringing. She knows how to handle herself. Also, she openly calls close relationship boom boom, which is hilarious. Story 14. From what I've seen, they don't go so well. I work for an airline, on a maintenance base, and apparently using employee flight benefits to get mail-order brides is not uncommon out here. I know of at least 5 guys who have used a mail-order service. I personally work with one guy who did not have a good experience and recently divorced his. Another coworker is herself, a mail order bride, and her husband works on the same base. However, they do not have a good relationship either and are known to fight regularly. He refuses to work in the same area or on the same shift as her. Story 15. I was watching an expose on the Russian bride topic a while back. Basically, at one point, there used to be legit agencies that did actually help match you up with Russian women. But in the past 5-10 years, they all fell into control of 3 crooked companies that run all these sites. Basically, they lure you in with promising profiles of hot women. But to interact with those women, you have to pay a lot of money. They have chat programs running that cost $3 a minute or whatever. Then, for the real big suckers that fly out to Russia, they have events and they basically screw you financially on everything for the time you are there. The women are there as independent scammers, or at the very least, not interested in marriage at all. They come for the party and free food and drink at meetups, and that's it. And the scammer women try to extract money from these guys. There is no marriage. Story 16. I know a really great guy who has a Russian wife that he met through an internet service. To be 100% honest, they are probably the happiest, most in love couple that I know. He's a gardener who got sick of Australian women judging him for his career choice and trying to push him into some sort of lower level of social status, which is fair enough, I suppose. From start to finish, the whole exercise ended up costing him just under $80,000. Svetlana is an absolute babe, by the way. She lives for her husband and is, without question, one of the most beautiful women I've ever seen. Story 17. My dad bought one last year. He got her from Russia. She's about 30 years old and he's 44. He explained the process to me. They emailed for a while, then he visited her, and a few months later, she came to the US on a fiancé visa, which allowed her to stay for a few months while he decided if he actually wanted to marry her. She doesn't speak English and she's not hot. The weirdest thing from my perspective is the brainwashing. The sites spend a lot of bandwidth telling fat old Americans that younger Russian women find them hot. They get saps like my dad to believe that there's some kind of fascinating exotic creature to these women while implying all Russian men are poor drunks. They say these hot Russian brides just can't find a decent man in their own country because there simply aren't any, so any American can swoop in. After laying the groundwork, they try to build up international dating as a time-tested and common method to find love. Story 18. Long story, but a few years ago, my dad met a Ukrainian woman on a Russian dating site, and she said she loved him. Essentially a mail-order bride service. My dad had only met her in person once before he gave her a ring. The first time I ever met her was at the airport as my dad was coming back, and she only spoke like 5 words of English. She also had a 19-year-old daughter who she wanted to bring to the US when she could. So a year goes by and my extremely lonely dad gets happier, and my new stepmom does work on it and gets fluent at English. She was nice and trying to be a member of the family, but she did show the warning signs. She thought my dad was rich when he wasn't. As a result, he was always broke. It cost about $10,000 in paperwork fees alone to bring someone over, not forgetting the cost of airline fees and buying whole new amenities to replace the stuff you can't bring over. The moment her daughter finally arrives, though, her switch goes off and she stops pretending. My dad and her are constantly fighting about the fact that my stepmom had lied about her interests before coming over. Go figure. At this point, we all stopped pretending to like each other. And it doesn't help that her daughter had a mental illness that meant that she could never live on her own. And my stepmom had conveniently forgotten to mention this to my dad before she came to the States. My dad realizes she never actually loved him at this point, but she was such a big investment he wasn't going to let her go. But of course, she starts cheating and looking for another rich white American to marry. And one day, without notice, she moved out and left her daughter in our care for the next 7 months. My dad and her got divorced, but unfortunately, her new man was rich as cow and hired an expensive lawyer to take as much money as possible from my dad. And now, 3 years later, my dad is still recovering with his financial debt, and at the worst, we were facing foreclosure. And the worst part is, he still regulars the Russian dating sites looking for another go. Story 19. During the 70s, my uncle was stationed in Korea and fell in love and married a Korean girl. She wanted to bring her cousin over to America, so he asked his best friend if he would be interested in marrying my aunt's cousin. He was reluctant, so her family offered $5,000 to him to marry her. He eventually agreed. She came to America and they got married. After a few months, my uncle's friend comes to him and tells him that he and my aunt's cousin have fallen deeply in love and that they seem to have been destined for each other. He then hands an envelope to my uncle that contained the $5,000. Today, my uncle and his best friend are fathers and grandfathers. Their families are still happily together. Story 20. One does not simply purchase another human being these days. Legally, anyway. My friend's dad used a service which we jokingly referred to as the mail order bridery. But to hear him tell it, it's really more like a simple dating service. The goal is clearly to find a spouse, but so is the goal of eHarmony. Less of it was online than places like eHarmony and Match.com and similar services, but for the most part, it wasn't much different. He's currently married to a nice Thai lady who can cook anything you hand to her, and they are very happy together. He loves her family, and her family loves his. They visit Thailand regularly, and he's happier than I've ever known him to be before he remarried. Story 21. This will get lost, but whatever. My stepmother, I hate saying that word, is from Russia. Although she is not a mail order, she may as well be. I do still call her the mail order bad person behind her back. I sound very hateful, but she is the most vile, evil person I have ever met in my entire life. Soon after she came to America, she started having an affair with my father. Fast forward 9 years. They are now married. My dad was having an affair with her for about 5 years before my parents got divorced. If there is a devil, she is it. She hates all of my dad's kids and makes it a point to show it. I think my dad hates her sometimes too, but he never seems to leave her. I think he enjoys having a cook, cleaning lady, and whatever else she gives him. I think that she is only with my father because he has money. And obviously, nothing is motivating her to leave her spoiled lifestyle. I know he realizes that she treats his kids like cow and that she is a horrible person. But for some reason, he just stays. The worst part is that he tells my little sister I'm getting rid of her when in reality he never will. He told me the same things when I was her age. I just hate that she is such a strong barrier between my dad and his kids. But on the bright side, I have lots of stories about the crazy Russian lady that my friends like to hear. Note, my mother is remarried and my stepdad is the cow. Story 22. When I was around 8 or so, my family was at a carnival. My mom is this little Filipino woman, but she was born here. My dad is the whitest guy ever. Anyways, this guy came up to my dad, pointed at my mom, and said, "So, how do you like her?" Naturally, my dad was a little confused and goes, what? And the guy said, "Didn't you order her?" Luckily, my dad has a sense of humor and told him the arrangement was great. Story 23. The ignorance is strong in this thread. Is it deliberate? I bought a mail-order bride if buying her picture and address counts as buying her. This was from Cherry Blossoms in 1984, when it was under different management and, obviously, pre-internet. I wrote to 35 women all over the Far East, 17 of which thought I was worth writing back to. There was one standout, and by the end of 2 months, she was the only one I was still writing to. After 6 months, I went to her country to meet her. The Immigration and Naturalization Service requires a face-to-face meeting before any type of visa will be issued. Here is where you start to spend real money, not for her, but on airfare. The face-to-face meeting confirmed what we already knew. We liked each other and wanted to get married. BTW, she is the same age as me, holds 2 bachelor's degrees. Father was a lawyer. That eliminates the gold diggers that most people claim these women are. After another 6 months of writing back and forth, she came to the USA and we were married 10 days later. Summary. You write to a woman overseas. You have to make her like you, just like a face-to-face courtship. After about a year, more or less, you bring her here. Total cost, this was 27 years ago, about $5,000, almost all of which was airfare. Story 24. My story is different than the mail-order bride. I had visited my grandparents' house, and after I left the neighbor across the street, asked my grandmother if I was seeing anyone. She asked if I would like to meet her aunt. The next time I was over, I spoke with the neighbor to ask when her aunt would be there so I could meet her. It was at this point I was told I would have to go to Vietnam if I wanted to meet her. I was a little shocked by this idea. A couple of months went by, and I decided, what the hell, why not? It will be a great vacation regardless. Married almost 10 years. Story 25. I used to work with a guy that used one of these services. He talked to her online a few times and by phone a few times. She was from Hungary, if I remember correctly. Then he flew over and the service arranged for them to meet in person a few times. I saw some pics of her and she was smoking hot. He said she was a very sweet person and her English was pretty good. So he pays the service $5,000 and also covers her travel expenses, in addition to doing a bunch of paperwork so she can legally come to the US and be with him. When he goes to pick her up at the airport, it is a completely different girl. She isn't even close to looking like the girl he met. He contacted the agency and they told him there was a mix-up. They said if he helped her get a flight back, they would get things straightened out and then send the correct girl over and they would cover the cost. He paid for her to fly back, and that was the last he ever heard of them or the girl he had met. He spent probably $15K between their fees, travel costs, and money he sent her to buy stuff for her, and it was all an elaborate scam. Story 26. I can think of 2 off the top of my head. I'll start with the nastier one. I worked with an older guy who bought his wife from China. He isn't well off and could only afford an older, 30-something lady with a son. Turns out she's a lovely lady, very friendly and kind. They recently got her son over to live here too, where he's studying. He tries to control every aspect of her life. He won't let her work many hours. So she can't save money for herself to get away. Won't let her get her license. Won't let her spend time with other people or go out and do things herself, etc. Her son recently got her license and it seems they're ready to bolt from him. Good for them. The other one is another older guy, probably 70 or so. He's involved in humanitarian charity work of his own accord in Cambodia. He recently got married to a young lady. I don't know how old she is, but she's definitely not out of her 20s. She's also very, very beautiful. They're now living back and forth between Australia, her village, and Cambodia, and working on making it a better place. Not exactly a mail-order bride scene as I think they met in person, but it's a nice story. Story 27. My ex-landlord had a Thai mail-order bride. He was a raging, unpleasant person and treated her terribly, always out cheating on her and making her feel worthless, but would hold it over her head that he brought her here. Besides his illegal rentals and candy dealing, she was the sole income and worked long days in a local factory. She would cry to me constantly about how much she hated him. Then she would make me some awesome spring rolls for listening. The government was investigating them one time, and he made me write a letter saying I had known them for years, and they were happily married, and we had to take pictures together to make it look like we were friends so she wouldn't get deported. A month before I moved, she bought a one-way ticket to Australia, and I don't know if she ever came back. Story 28. Back in '96, I was hooking my friend up with IRC and ICQ and all that, so he can talk and meet ladies. We were 25. Couple months go by, I over his house and shows me these pictures of the hottest 20-year-old Russian chic Eve seen to this day. They met in IRC and started talking on IRC for an hour at a time, then by phone. It's like $1 for 3 minutes, and they spoke hours. She pays for calls and internet, she says. Internet is same like $3 hour. So one day he says she's coming over and she's going to stay with him and his mom. Girl shows up, she's rich or doesn't need anything, and she looks better in person than pictures. Friend acts like shower to me in a club I work at. She's super nice to me. Fast forward 3 weeks, he comes crying that one day she left and never came back. She married his best friend a month later. Fudge, I wish it were me. She was just looking for visa. Story 29. While on vacation one year, I met 2 girls who were mail-order brides. They were from Belarus and were both, at different times, consorts to the same billionaire Russian industrialist. So you can imagine how beautiful they were. They both moved to the US to marry some wealthy businessmen, but marriages both ended after 10 years or so. They said that they got married young and the age difference was difficult once the men hit their 50 ace, but the men were very good to them and everyone got what they wanted and parted as friends. While the girls were quite pragmatic about it, they did say that they came to love their husbands, enough to have children and commit to being a permanent part of each other's lives. Story 30. I know quite a few people who have done it. It has worked out for some of them, but one of the guys it didn't work out for at all. It seems like it is mostly his fault for the failure, but I don't know her, so maybe they are both assholes. He had 3 kids with her, one right at the end, and then she threw him out and got most of the money property. Despite his personality, he was able to pull in a fair amount of money due to having some tough-to-get qualifications. I know 6 guys that have done this, and 5 of them seem to be at least as happy as the ones that went a more traditional route of marriage. None of them are as happy as the guys I know that are just banging random 25-year-olds on a regular basis, though. Story 31. My brother did this. He broke up with a woman who was doing the dirty for cola, and my brother just plain old gave up on North Americans. So his Vietnamese friend introduced him to his cousin over the internet. They chatted all the time, though she didn't really speak English, and he went to Vietnam and married her, promising to get her over to Canada as soon as possible. So 2 years goes by and he hasn't sobered up long enough to actually speak to a lawyer or anything, so her family in Canada did the legwork and brought her over. Then my brother impregnated her on her 2nd day in the country and still hasn't sobered up. They broke up for a while, and she and their son stayed with my parents while my brother went off to be a dirtbag in the woods for a while. He's moved home and swears that he wants to make their marriage work. She's incredible, strong and dedicated and disciplined and funny and caring and loving and sweet. Their son is the light of my life and is going to have a lot of issues growing up, but for now he's smart and funny and perfect. Anti-bias. My brother is a drunken dirtbag, but 2 out of 3 ain't bad, I guess. Story 32. A guy I know who came to the US from Iran maybe 10 years ago or so, started up several bars and made himself a decent chunk of change. One day he decided he wanted a Russian woman. So he gets himself a Russian mail-order bride with a stereotypical Russian name of Olga. I didn't know this guy too well. My sister worked for him and I knew him through her. This girl shows up and starts working in his bar as well. Not going to lie, I can tell why he picked her. She was extremely attractive, but she didn't take anyone's cow. Eventually she left him after a big, very public argument. She disappears for a bit and apparently went to Alaska. She comes back and starts working for him again, but they're no longer together. Ever since that, she actually became a pretty genuine and decent person. But she knows she's attractive, and she does everything she can to use that to her advantage. I don't know how this guy put up with her sometimes. She's extremely high maintenance, and I wouldn't even bother. I don't care how attractive she is. I also worked with a woman who, as I got to know her, found out she was a Filipino mail-order bride. She hated her husband and wanted out. He was extremely abusive and overbearing. She suffered through it until she could leave him and be on her own. Her and I got pretty close, up until she left him. I saw her once last time. Then she moved away and no one has heard from her since. Story 33. My boss's uncle was always trying to get this Russian bride over. He would take the trips to Russia to see her, where he would spend large percentages of his retirement. In the end, he tried to move her here. He failed because every time she landed at any airport around here, the authorities would detain her. She was on some kind of list and not permitted to enter our country. I remember him stopping by our work one day after spending several hours at the airport waiting on her. He was so upset and didn't understand why she was labeled a criminal. My boss was telling me that he overheard a phone call she made to him where she asked for $45,000. His uncle had no problem wiring the money to her. He ended up wasting most of his money and became very depressed. He stopped taking his medication and eventually passed away. Story 34. A friend of mine got one from South America. I can't remember the specific country. He brought her to Louisiana, so she had a mix of a Spanish Cajun accent. My friend is happy they have 2 kids together, but she's super materialistic and lazy. IMO. She'll tell stories of living in a mud hut and being basically in a hunter-gatherer situation to live. But I've seen her complain that her car was old when it was only 2 years old, and whine that her phone is only an iPhone 4, 2 weeks after the 5 came out. My friend bought her a cafe to work, and it wasn't profitable because she'd open it at random, never consistently. Story 35. How the hell did I end up reading over 20 stories of ordering brides? From my point of view, men from prospecting areas, USA, Canada, Australia, EU, should make a website where they promote themselves and make the brides contact you and pay their own ticket. That way you would know that she really wants to come. But that system would be exploited by bad men. I mean, I just don't see luck in these kind of things. Sure, it can work out, and I hope that everyone succeeds, but I believe it is hard. Story 36. My former coworker was married for years. Then he and his wife had a fight. He put her out, and within 6 months he had a new Russian bride. She had to go back and forth quite a bit at first as she finalized her papers. So many months here in Canada and so many months back in Russia. They have a daughter and have been together. Oh, I guess 8 years now? She's very sweet and shy around other people, makes amazing food. He's kind of a goofy, inappropriately blunt kind of guy. But he seems to treat her very well and they make it work. Story 37. My coworker is an actual mail-order bride. Her story is simple, but it's kind of sad. She was born in the Philippines and was a woman from a very early age. She got very little formal education and therefore has a lot of trouble with getting a decent job in Canada. But anyway, her husband is about 30 or so years older than her and has depression. His depression has made her family life extremely hard because she genuinely was interested in having a healthy relationship with her husband. And so a child came. The child is probably the only thing keeping them in the same house. Although they are separated now, she loves her kid more than anything in the world. She does, however, sleep around way too frequently and has came on to me several times at work. Anywho, edit. She's a cashier now at a retail store and now lives your average semi-depressed, kinda okay, mostly stressed life. Story 38. I worked in the parts department at a dealership in college. We had an older parts driver, probably in his 60s. He had gotten a Russian mail-order bride. He'd actually gone over there to visit us several times first. Seemed quite happy. She eventually came over here and they were married. Met her a few times when she came into the shop. She was probably about his age or maybe slightly younger. The sad part is, just after their honeymoon, he was diagnosed with terminal cancer and passed away not much after that. Story 39. My mother is Ukrainian, and we've been active in a large Ukrainian community here in the US since I was born. In that time, I've seen a few mail-order Ukrainian brides come and go. Makes for wonderful gossip. Most of these relationships seem to end badly, at least from what I've seen. I think a lot of American men who look for these brides have this mistaken idea that Ukrainian women are submissive. Yeah, right? Hang around the Ukrainian community a few weeks and you will see just how wrong you are. Yes, Ukrainian women dress more feminine than American women, generally speaking. But that does not translate to doormat. A lot of these women are well educated. They get to the US, get their immigration status sorted out, and then promptly leave their befuddled American husband. My father is American, but my mother had been here for a few years before they met and married, so she is not a mail-order bride. They've been married over 40 years and they look pretty happy to me. Story 40. I'm leaving this window open and staring at me as I try to decide how to tell this story. My coworker suffers from a freshly renamed syndrome, Asperger's, and has a hard time around people. I could tell a few stories, but over the years I've acquired enough respect for him to leave him alone about it. He got a mail-order bride from China, and I have this awful fear she's just counting the days until she gets a green card. Let me be clear. I want her to stay with him and make him happy forever. But all their plans seem to be centered around the date of her green card. When you ask him if they're going to have children or some other life direction type question, the answer is always after the green card comes in. It leaves me feeling bad when I talk about it. Story 41. A good family friend has one. He was always incredibly shy, even though he was hilarious, smart, and generally a good person. He went to Poland to meet some women with his father a few years back, so basically his family set it up. He met a few women, 4 or 5, and after coming back mailed a few of them to see if they were interested. Only one replied, and he went back to Poland a few months later to marry her and bring her back. I think he was initially happy because he never had to play the dating game or learn to talk to women, but from my perspective, it has been a complete bust. She is pushy, mean, refuses to work, and goes on months-long trips back home by herself to visit her family. She has basically alienated him from all of his friends and even family because she won't let him have any friends that aren't part of her circle of friends here. They are all Polish. She clearly hates his family and does nothing but complain about how much better life is back home, even though she's made little to no effort to actually find something she likes here. I hate her. His entire family hates her. I think he hates her too, but he doesn't think he could ever do any better, so I figure they'll stay together forever. Story 42. I don't know if my uncle did. I just know he's an older, partially disabled, wealthy guy, and he went on vacation to Eastern Europe and came back with a long-distance girlfriend that he corresponded with for several months. Then he visited again and suddenly he's engaged to a gorgeous woman my age, 28 years his junior. But he's a funny, sweet, charismatic guy, so it might have been totally non-commercial. And they're still happy together, years later, with a beautiful kid. Who knows? I love them both and wish them the best. Story 43. I was at a seaplane pilots meetup in North Alabama on a small lake a few years back. One of the other pilots had recently ordered a bride from Russia. She was blonde, blue-eyed, and absolutely beautiful with a delightful smile. I'll never forget the moment, though, when she pulled out pictures of her children back in Russia that would be coming to the States soon. Her husband had no idea about the children. Story 44. Back in the 90s, I knew 2 guys who did. One was insane, the other was a big, fat, ugly sack of cow. The first guy married a very friendly, intelligent, warm Romanian woman whom he treated like cow because I think he expected some subservient idiot that didn't speak English and would be his maid. She stuck it out until the exact day her naturalization went through and she divorced his crazy peach. The second guy got a tall Asian knockout. She walked all over him and used him to pay for having her entire extended family shipped over to live under his roof on his dime. Last I heard, her family had completely taken over his house and he was sleeping on a couch in his basement, but he's too shy to throw them out. That was in the 90s and I don't know what's happened since. Story 45. It's a shame that this will be buried, but I am a product of a mail-order relationship. I did not know of this term, mail-order bride, until today. I know my father explained to us, children in the past, that he met my mom, Philippines, in the 80s through a catalog a coworker of his introduced him to. They were both in their mid to late 30s at the time. I always imagined the catalog as a somewhat primitive form of online dating web service. To call this act as mail order is absolutely disgusting in my opinion. I recall that my father had also written several other women letters, but eventually through time, he selected my mother to be the one to marry. Since my father and mother were both Catholic, they ended up getting married twice. My father refuses to go into detail about this even though I am 20, but I imagine the first time they got married in court so she wouldn't be limited to stay in the States with her visa. My mother passed away from cancer 7 years ago, and so I will unfortunately not hear from her side of the story why she chose that destiny. My father is somewhat like a polar opposite of his side of the family. His family seems to be quite successful and outgoing, as they have attained education at Ivy League schools and are pretty well off as upper-class people, while my father, on the other hand, is not. I'm really curious as to the exact definition of mail-order bride, because what if you meet someone online randomly from a different country and you eventually become interested in each other? Could that be possibly called the same thing? Story 46. My dad married a lady from the Philippines he had never met on the day she arrived in the country. Then they had to go through the farce of creating a history for themselves for immigration. However, in the end, it turned out fine. They fell in love. My dad was like a kid giddy in his first real love affair. She was his third wife, my mom first. Then sadly, Dad got cancer 12 years after they married. She nursed him through it, and when he passed away, she and her family embraced his children, all 7 of us, into their family. She was the best thing that ever happened to my dad. Story 47. My mom was sort of a mail-order bride from the Philippines. Her cousin offered my dad a wife if he paid, but he ended up choosing my mom. She married him when she was 19. I understand why she did it. She grew up in poverty, and coming to a first world country seemed amazing. He was a very nasty man. She stayed with him for about 10 years until I came along, and then she ran away when I was 9 months old. He only hit her once. She threatened him with a knife, so he never did it again. I found the court papers for the divorce. But abuse doesn't have to be physical. I don't speak to him either. I had court-mandated visitations as a child, and his terrible behavior didn't stop with her. I think my mom is a wonderful, strong woman, and if I'm half as amazing as her, I'll be happy. Story 48. Though my mom technically was a mail-order bride, in the way that my dad paid for a list of girls' addresses from another country, I don't feel any differently about it than normal people. They exchanged letters for a while before getting married. It wasn't like you would imagine or what else may be out there. Their relationship is just as strong as any regular relationship, it just had a slightly different beginning. Story 49. Some work out, some don't. My parents divorced when I was 2. He married my mom out of selfish reasons. He wanted kids because everyone else was. He was in his late 40s while my mom was 26 when they met. They fought constantly, almost terminated each other a few times. My mom admits to drinking chemicals to try and have a miscarriage while she was pregnant with me. She was so unhappy with him. She is from the Philippines. Her family wanted her to have a better life in America with an American military man. Little did they know it would become a nightmare. There was a lot of abuse on both sides. My dad became an alcoholic, and my mom abuses pills. My brother and I still have a lot of issues because of our childhood. Story 50. My mom never actually told me the story of how my parents met, but from the little details she gave me, I'm about 99% sure she was a mail-order bride. She's from the Philippines, where marital abuse is common and divorce is illegal, so I understand her wanting to leave. She witnessed her older sisters being physically and emotionally abused by their husbands, which drove them away from their country and family. My parents met through a newspaper, so I've been told. I'm not sure of the logistics of it since my father is Russian. I just know they met, got married, and moved to the US. To make a long story short, my dad was a great father, from what I remember of the 10 years I knew him. He was also great at running away from the police and escaping the country when he was being suspected of one of his 5th grade students. He abandoned his family so easily. My mom knew he was guilty, and she protected him. She was weak, easily manipulated, and a coward. Story 51. My mother was not a mail-order bride exactly, but my parents were in an arranged marriage and did not know each other previously when they married. My dad had immigrated to the US as a preteen and went back to his home country to find a wife in his 20s. My mom was 19, never finished high school because she couldn't afford it, and lived with her aunt who raised her. They had an arrangement, married, and within 2 months, my mom was pregnant with me and on a plane to the US. I have happy memories with my family, but a lot of it is overshadowed by my dad's alcoholism and fights between my parents. My parents separated for 2 years when I was 5, got back together, had my brother, and finally divorced when I was about 14. I was so relieved when they finally split up because I was honestly tired of it. I haven't spoken to my dad in a few years. I don't want to make my life more dramatic than it is, because plenty of people's parent divorce, but I do feel that the situation with the arranged marriage and divorce strained the relationship between me and both my parents. My mom also has never had a real relationship out of love, even though she's been with the man she's with now for 5 years. If anything, it's more of him helping her out and her paying for his lifestyle. The bright side, though, is my mom has a ton of perseverance, has pretty much raised both me and my brother herself, and makes 6 figures as a small business owner. She's a US citizen now, has a nice lakeside house, and drives a Lexus. Yes, we're Asian LOL. I did well in school, and she helped me financially through college, where I graduated from with a computer science degree, so she can be proud, haha. She still has struggles because of her limited English and never having finished high school, but she has accomplished her American dream despite the circumstances of how she got here. Story 52. My mom was technically a mail-order bride in the sense that my dad got her information from a catalog of women from the Philippines. They wrote letters back and forth for a few months, met in person twice before getting married. They were pretty different from one another and are incompatible in many ways. I watched them offend one another a lot. But I did enjoy growing up in a bicultural home. However, I don't think my experience was much different from other bicultural families. My dad was very embracing of my mother's heritage, and over time, became much more sensitive and understanding. Seeing the struggles in the earlier part of their marriage definitely shaped my views on marriage. Story 53. Wow. After reading all these Philippines posts, it really makes me wonder if my mom was one. According to my mom, my aunt, who was an escort, introduced her to my dad while he was stationed in the Philippines. My aunt also introduced her other sister to a military man. They're still married. My parents divorced when I was in high school. Dad was overly jealous and had social anxiety, It didn't mix well with my mom's love for Filipino parties, karaoke bars, and line dancing. Other than that, my childhood had a few rough patches, but that's due to my parents' mental illnesses and my own. Story 54. I'm not the child, but it was my uncle who married a lady from the Philippines. My uncle was this old Newfoundlander who smoked and drank. Really wasn't a nice guy. She came to this little town in Newfoundland. I felt terrible for her. For years she didn't really talk. Probably my uncle wouldn't let her. They had a son. And then my uncle passed away and it was like the whole world opened up for her. It was like life was breathed into her. She became an emergency paramedic and stayed in my town. She is lovely and honestly was way too good for my uncle. Story 55. My mom isn't mail order, but my parents were arranged. They didn't meet until about 2 weeks before the wedding. My grandparents were all from the same city in Eastern Europe, and my paternal grandparents moved to Canada in the 1950s. One day in the 90s, my dad's mom is seeking out my maternal grandmother. They get to talking and somehow arrange that my mother comes to Canada. She was going to a place full of people she didn't know and where she didn't speak the language. She didn't want anything to do with my dad, and I was born via IVF. Fast forward 25 years from their first meeting, they don't love each other but are friends. They mostly live like roommates. There was no lack of love growing up, and I wouldn't trade my childhood for the world. Story 56. Pretty late, but I really feel like I should say it. My dad's about 40 years older than my mom. He's older than my grandpa even. It disgusts me. My mom wanted a better life and all that for her side of the family, and my dad's side was rich, but he practically ran all his money down the drain by the time my mom arrived in the States. My mom did all the housework while working. My dad did nothing and still does nothing besides watching TV. They argue and yell frequently. I don't remember the last time my dad wasn't an extremely loud piece of nonsense. We're still pretty poor. Not enough to be starving. And I love them, but I know my mom and brother would leave my dad in a heartbeat if our economic situation were better. He's 90 now, and I don't know how I'll be able to sort out our living situation. I'm so sorry to my mom who had to put up with him. Makes me really uncomfortable when well-off older dudes in their 40s and 50s try to get with me. I really don't want to make the mistakes my mom did. Pretty glad to see that there are some wholesome posts regarding this topic, though. One step at a time, I suppose.